Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Poetic Genius of. So today we're going to be taking a look at the poetic genius of CCGG Madness. Now a little brief disclaimer in case you're new to this series. This is basically a series where we go line by line analyzing the poetic devices and techniques being utilized by the lyrics in order to come up with an interpretation and a better understanding of the themes and messages of the song. That being said, this is just my interpretation, so I'm not trying to put any of this onto the original writers. But yeah, I think it's just a fun exercise to sort of use these techniques and apply them to something we love, like Hololive music. So that being said, let's jump right into it. Alright, so our introduction goes: CCGG Madness, Automos, now listen. CCGG Madness, Grems, get in position. CCGG Madness, Orange Green Division, Autofister. So right from the get-go, we can see that they're sort of combining their names and kind of also their nicknames. So Cecilia often goes by Cici, and then Gigi also just sounds like you're saying the two letters Gigi together. So that's what's going on here with the madness. But then we get sort of a call to the audience and a sort of call out of the audience, potentially. So the big thing I want to discuss in today's video is who Cici and Gigi are talking to, and if the Cecilia and Gigi being mentioned are always the same Cici and Gigi being mentioned throughout the song. Basically, my theory is that there are basically two versions of Cici and Gigi being mentioned throughout this song, and they're sort of having a conversation with each other, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, it'll make more sense as we go along. But that being said, we also get a mention of the Automos, and we're being told, now listen, and then the Grems for Gigi, get in position. So the Automos are sort of like the fan mascots of Cecilia's fan base, and the Grems are for Gigi. But what matters here is that they're telling the Automos to now listen and to get in position. So they're involving these two sort of entities and bodies of fan bases. But again, keep in mind that I'm not sure if the rest of the song is actually, for example, talking to the Automos and Grems. This intro would make you believe that because it's saying listen up, we're about to basically tell you something, but I think it gets a bit more complicated as the song goes. But we can also keep that in mind because maybe I'm wrong, and as we go, we'll find the opposite to be true, and we'll discover that maybe this is to the Automos and the Grems. Beyond that, in terms of the actual poetics of, I want to appreciate that listen and position and division are all very close rhymes. I'd say listen and position are very close, but then position and division, despite visually having that ION ending, the T here kind of changes it from the S that we have in division. And then we get this next part, which is Autofister, which is sort of a name for the collaborative efforts of Cici and Gigi. But it's also interesting because it sort of breaks up this rhyme flow, but as a result, it sort of sets you up for the first verse. It's because you get this sort of this first three lines are all connected: listen, position, division. Then you get Autofister, which sort of ends it. It's almost like a punctuation at the end of this introduction, which is a pretty cool thing you can do with rhyme scheme. It's something to keep in mind with your own writing, how breaking that rhyme scheme and breaking that sort of flow state of the rhyme can actually serve a similar role to punctuation in a sentence. Now, we also have mention of, 3 repetitions of the word madness, so I think we should sort of keep that idea of madness in mind as we go on. And then what's also interesting is the Automos and the Grems are technically separate entities. They're both fans of Cici and Gigi, but in their own respective circles, and they're also sort of fan bases within the larger entity of Hololive Justice. But here, they're sort of being combined into Orange-Green Division. So, that may be part of what they're listening to. They're listening to their orders to get into position, which will then sort of combine them as one entity for the Orange-Green Division. But that being said, let's jump into into the first verse and get into the real sort of meat of this song. All right, I feel like I've tried to record this part a couple of times now. So we're in the refrain. For some reason, the word automaton is sounding really weird, and I feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong every time, but so that's me saying this. So if I keep pronouncing it wrong, just know that I'm aware that I'm messing it up. But we get hey hey CCGG mad fun, hey hey gremlin automaton, hey hey CCGG mad fun, hey hey gremlin automaton. And so here we get this sort of repetition of the hey hey, and then we have sort of, I don't know, you could argue it is an A rhyme scheme, or you could say it's an A B rhyme scheme, because obviously fun and fun rhymes, and automaton rhyme, but when you say automaton and fun, they're really close rhymes, and I feel like based on how you're actually pronouncing it, you could argue successfully that that is a rhyme, especially in the context of a song. So I think you could say that this is all, sort of a perfect rhyme of A. But that being said, the other reason I sort of wanted to put this up on the board is because I think there's something sort of interesting, again, going on with these sort of identities. So we have Cecilia Immergreen and Gigi Murin are the actual names of the actual performers, and CCGG is sort of the name for their sort of collective, along with Autofister. And here the CC again stands for Cecilia, and let's get a different color, the GG stands for Gigi Murin. However, I think it's sort of interesting that in this first line then, they therefore sort of call themselves by this CCGG collective, but then in the next part, they don't use their own names. They sort of use their fantasy race identifications. And I feel like that's sort of interesting because in a way, it's almost like a sort of base level identity. For example, someone else's base level identity might be human, but then if you ask them, oh, well, who are you? They'd either say their name, or if they were being sort of, philosophical about it, they might say some other title that they think describes their identity. So they might say that they're a poet or a dreamer or, a lawyer or, a radio host. It's like whatever their sort of job or role is, or it could be, again, more of an even deeper level or a different level above sort of base level identity would be, again, like if they say that they're like a dreamer or a hopeful person or, an afraid person, a fearful person, then they're starting to apply their own human psychology onto themselves as how they describe themselves. Oh, I'm just a coward. Like if you think of that sort of language. So I think it's sort of interesting here that in this passage, they're just saying basically what they are at that base level. They're a gremlin and an automaton. But at the same time, it's not being said in a negative way about going to that base level identity, but instead it feels very celebratory. It's hey, they're talking about fun. It's an upbeat passage. But as we continue on in our discussion of this whole song, I want you to keep this sort of in mind because, again, I think there's something interesting going on where I feel like CCGG is sort of talking to Cecilia Immergreen and Gigi Murin, in which they're almost separate entities and they're able to almost have a conversation with each other. But with that being said, let's just jump right into the next passage. So then we get this interlude, and this is where things start to get interesting. So the passage goes, I guess I should first sort of divide it into who is speaking. Let me actually do a different color here. So we get this first part, which comes from Gigi, which goes, Guten Tag, can you tell me where the bathroom is? I've been walking around all day and I really need to go. Then we have Cici go, no, but I've seen this super cute cafe around the corner where they sell tea and I'm gonna totally butcher pronouncing this, but Baumenkuchen maybe. And then Gigi goes, sorry, I don't speak German. And then Cici says, oh, now there's tons of humor in this already. And for example, Gigi starts the passage speaking in German by saying Guten Tag, but then she says, I don't speak German. And then here, Cici isn't actually really speaking German, except for the name of this dessert. This dessert is also very popular in Japan, so it's all the more interesting because, like, in a way, that's not really speaking German. So when, you know what I mean, when you're using like a food name of a certain culture, and you're speaking it in your own mother tongue or whatever, it doesn't really count as you speaking a different language. So anyway, there's humor here. However, I think what's also interesting is, as we're going to see in the next passage, so basically, I think there's, again, as I've been saying, two sort of entities here. And I think if you almost think of it as a play, there's sort of like the main plot, and then there is the foil plot. And this is something that like Shakespeare did a lot, and it's obviously in a lot of other stuff, where you'll have your main plot, and then every once in a while you'll have those characters go off stage, and then your foil plot will run onto stage, and they'll be into their own hijinks, but it sort of mirrors the original plot, though it's usually sort of comedic. So if you have a real story where a character is going on this epic, you know, tale of revenge, and they're going across all of these different landscapes and fighting all of these people, and then you have, you know, them exit off stage, and then you have your foil plot come on. It might have two, you know, clown characters who are trying to get revenge on each other for eating the last chocolate or whatever. So I think part of that's what's happening. But I also think there's sort of almost a weird sort of cat in the hat type of situation going on here. This is supposed to be a top hat. In which it feels like, so there's like this Gigi, the one that's saying Guten Tag, and this Cecilia who's talking about the super cute cafe. And if you think of Cat in the Hat, they're almost like the kids. Those two are like the kids. And then the CCGG Madness characters are more like the Cat in the Hat and sort of Thing 1 and Thing 2. And so you have these moments where these two characters are interacting with each other, and then you have this sort of separate voice of the Cat in the Hat, which is then going to talk to these two and sort of counsel them and try to get them to sort of dive into the sort of CCGG madness. There's also a different level to it where there's sort of a, almost I would say, sort of a like devil aspect, which I know sounds crazy, but if you look at historical writing like that of John Milton, he has his whole, I think it's called Comus, it's this whole tradition in writing where you have your normal characters who are going about their lives, and then this sort of like devil-like trickster character comes in and tries to sort of sway them into joining them in their sort of more like chaotic devil-esque life. So, you know, if you're to think of a more classic old story where you had it where there would be two, you know, quote unquote upright standing individuals who are very rigid and they follow all of the social rules and etiquette, and then one day this mysterious sort of dangerous character who's sort of, you know, devilish comes in and starts to tempt them into partying and, you know, giving in to vices, and they're sort of being persuasive of like, well, what's the harm in a little fun? And that whole trope that we've seen in, you know, tons of writing and all throughout kind of writing history, again, it sort of has its roots in early poetry. So I think there's also sort of an element of that, of the CCGG madness quote unquote entity being almost like this devil character. And then the third or fourth version is sort of just, it is them talking to themselves. And so in this one, which sort of also fits with a sort of sort of theatrical aspect is where you would have your two characters and they're on stage and they do a little interlude and a little skit like this, and then it's almost like the CCGG is sort of then them would then be turning to the audience and being like doing their whole sort of musical number, and the audience hears it and they're able to sort of, it's not quite an aside because it's not like other characters on stage can't hear it, but they sort of do their whole little moment of singing, and then it would be like the music cuts and they sit back down for another interlude and they do another skit and then we see it. So in that way they're technically the same, but the sort of like musical version is sort of serving almost like a Greek choir in a way, where they're sort of summarizing what's going on between these two characters and sort of their mental state and their friendship level and all of that. And then when the chorus is done, we go back to an interlude where we get a scene of the two characters, and then once again the two characters go back on stage and they sing and tell us about what's going on with these two characters. So I think all of that's being done in this song and all of that's sort of being played with. And as we look at the next passage, I think you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. So I think we should just jump right into it. So here we get what's classified as the first verse, and it goes, "On this day you are cursed to cope and keep it in your memory. Oh, come on, you're supposed to hope and let a brand of madness run its course." And what's interesting here is we have cope and hope as a rhyme, so A, but then memory doesn't rhyme with course, so we have sort of a B, C. But what's interesting here is, so this is where I sort of want to, again, ask you guys, who are they talking to, and you know, who, in a roundabout way, who's listening, and like, who's this message for? Is this to the automaton, or the automos and the gremlins, the grems, or who's this for? Because it says, let our brand of madness run its course. You're supposed to hope. On this day you are crushed to cope and keep it in your memory. So there's all these yous here, and so who is you? And then here with our, who is our? Is our CCGG, or is it Cecilia and Gigi? And are they even separate entities? Because again, in the actual fan base, I get that it's the same person, or same two people. You know, CCGG is Cecilia and Gigi, but within the context of this song, I sort of feel like they may be two separate entities, where the interludes are Cecilia and Gigi, and then like the verses, for example, are CCGG / Autofister, if that makes sense. So beyond that, what are they actually saying? Let's look at the line by line. So on this day, let me give it blue. On this day, you are cursed to cope and keep it in your memory. So this is interesting. So on this day, you, and again, who is you, are cursed to cope. So, you know, they're having a bad day and they're being forced to sort of just go along with coping and trying to basically pretend it's not bad. But at the same time, they have to keep this in their memory, which means that this is a day they can't forget. So for some reason, they're cursed so that they can't forget this sort of bad day. And then you get this sort of, oh, come on, you're supposed to hope, which is interesting because it almost implies that there's sort of like a voice off camera kind of complaining. So, you know, it's on this day you are cursed to cope and keep it in your memory. Then you could almost, there's an unheard voice complaining and being like, but I don't want to. That's too hard. I don't feel like it. And then this first verse voice speaks up again and says, oh, come on, you're supposed to hope and let our brand of madness run its course. Alternatively, you could sort of read this as almost being a part 1 and part 2, where the first verse, let's get like a nice red here. So the first part, these first 2 lines are saying, oh, you're cursed to cope. But then someone else is saying, well, no, that's just hope. Being cursed to cope, isn't that a weird way of describing hope? Which I think is very fascinating. What is hope? Is hope ultimately just coping, or is it something different? I feel like people think of cope as they're already in a negative situation and they're trying to pretend it's not as bad as it is. But we also use it a lot as hope, where, you know, say in a fan base, someone really hopes that a sequel to their favorite game will come out, and everyone's like, that sequel's not going to come out, that's not going to come out. And then the first person is sort of coping and hoping that that next game will come out. So then if they hear a little bit of buzz about the sequel, even if it's like a, you know, not a good source, therefore they're sort of coping because they're buying into the smallest slimmer of hope. And then you have this, and let our brand of madness run its course. So the brand of madness is sort of in an alliance with this concept of hope instead of cope. So is there a degree of madness to the act of hoping? I think that's interesting. So again, there's sort of two different ways to sort of read this passage. And again, you have to say, well, if Cici and Gigi are both saying this, does this mean that one of them has the attitude of hope is actually a curse of coping, and the other one believes that no, that's actually hope? Or again, is it that there's actually sort of two versions of CCGG, and one is in this more negative situation, while this other sort of, again, kind of a cat in a hat vibe is trying to get them to, you know, enjoy their imagination in that sense of being hopeful. So let's jump into the next passage. So now we have our chorus, which goes, take our hand, let's fly away, oh we. Break a leg, now challenge fate, yay. Quick, before your time's up, give in and be our playmate. Hop, step, jump, our dreams await, yay. Love yourself, don't be afraid, ooh-wee. Sign just one condition, oh we. Give in, release all inhibition. So I want to take my time sort of dissecting this because there's a lot going on. So first of all, looking at sort of the rhyme scheme, so we have away and then this yay, but also the fate, the A in fate kind of lines up with the A in away. So we have at least an AA there. Then we have quick, before your time's up, give in and be our playmate. Playmate and fate rhymes. We have another A there. Again, it sort of rhymes with away. For sure, fate and mate rhyme, but I would also again argue that away and yay and fate rhyme. But it's sort of interesting since playmate and away don't rhyme, but it's sort of as it goes down the line, since away bounces off to fate and yay, and then this bounces off to playmate and fate to rhyme. Then we have await. Then we have afraid, condition, and inhibition. Inhibition and condition, they are their own sort of rhymes. And then we have afraid, which doesn't seem to rhyme with anything, but it again has that afraid, it has that A sound that we see in like away, afraid and fate, playmate, await, afraid. They're very close sounds, but it's not quite, you know, a rhyme. It's a near rhyme in that sense. Now, the next interesting thing here is the idea of give in and be our playmate. I think it's interesting because give in sort of has a negative connotation. If you're trying really hard to do something, but you keep struggling with it, if you give up or give in, you could also be giving in to temptation. You're giving in to your rage if you get into a fight. You know, it's sort of it's a releasing of yourself, but sort of usually with a negative connotation. But here they're saying give in and be our playmate. And again, we get this repetition of the idea of giving in at this last one. And that's what this one condition is that you have to sign. Sign just one condition, and that is to give in and release all inhibition. So by giving in, you're sort of giving into your sense of I don't know, the lack of inhibition is sort of, that's why we usually say a lack of inhibition. It's sort of an idea of, you're not as tense, you're not as socially conscious in terms of like social anxiety. You're not really thinking, oh, but won't people think I'm lame if I do this? When you release your inhibition, you're sort of removing that sort of sense of being all rigid with social etiquette and trying not to be cringe and all of that. So it's actually ultimately kind of a positive sentiment, even though you're giving into it, quote unquote. I think it's interesting since, as I mentioned earlier, there's sort of that concept of like in older poems where a devil-like character is trying to get some character to sort of stray off of the main path and then participate in a more sort of, in those older poems, it's a more like sinful, sort of like improper lifestyle. But modern poetry and a lot of modern songs, if you think of like, it's not even modern anymore, but if you think of stuff like, I don't know, Katy Perry, a lot of it's actually like reveling in that sort of state of a lack of inhibition. You also see this sort of start in the Romantic movement, which comes right after this sort of like Enlightenment and this very like tense, very scientific, very rigid sort of math-brained society then got, the Romantic movement, and then suddenly people were like, actually, people's individual thoughts and feelings and lived experiences have value, and emotions have value and should be considered and shouldn't just be, coldly eliminated. But all that being said, John Milton, which was sort of, pre-Romanticism, but also heavily inspired the Romantics, wrote of these sort of devilish characters who come in and sort of tempt the very rigid, normal person of the sort of old social etiquette. But what's interesting about John Milton's writing and some of those, Romantic ones, is previously the devil would then be seen as being the bad guy. Oh, he tried to tempt this person. And then the protagonist of that story would usually stick to the straight edge path, and they would then be celebrated at the end of not having fallen for the temptation. The Romantics, however, actually kind of switched this, where it was actually celebrated to be an individual and remove yourself from that path. So all that's to be said is, in literature and poetry and writing, usually when you have to sign a dotted line, it's sort of like it's sort of seen as being a devilish sort of image of, you sign this and then you get something. That's usually like a modern deal with the devil. But though some stories do the deal with the devil as being negative, again, the Romantic movement would say the deal with the devil isn't necessarily all bad. So here you have to sign and, just one condition, release all inhibition, but then you get to be their playmate, and then you get to take their hand and fly away. They get to challenge fate. They get a hop, step, jump. Their dreams are awaiting them. They get to love themselves and not be afraid. I feel like that's a pretty good deal. You release your inhibition, and then you get to do all of these positive, fun things like sign me up. I think it's also interesting, though, that there is sort of the sense of urgency that you must be quick about this before your time's up. That's sort of a scary concept, that, your time to pursue your dreams and fly away and challenge fate and also just be able to sort of dance and jump and hop and step. That's sort of like you have a finite amount of time that you can actually do that. So you need to be quick before your time's up and give in and be their playmate, or else you'll lose your chance and your opportunity to do that forever. I think that's sort of interesting and a bit stressful, honestly. But yeah, again, though, to go back to sort of the thing we were talking about earlier, I want to once again say, like, okay, so take our hand. So if it's taking their hand, that's CCGG, right? And let us fly away. So that's them plus the you. break a leg, now challenge fate, yay, quick before your time is up. So their time isn't at risk, probably because they've already released their inhibitions. But quick before your time's up, give in and be our playmate. Jump. Your dreams, our dreams await. Love yourself. So again, who is the you and who is the us and who is the them? And you know what I mean? Is this Cece and Gigi talking to like us, the audience? Is it them talking to the Automos and the Grems? Or is it sort of them talking to themselves in a way and telling themselves to release their inhibition before time runs up and then go challenge fate, etc.? I think it's sort of interesting, and I still don't have a clear answer to that, but I think the only way to find out is to keep going on. So let's jump to the next passage. So then we get our next interlude, which once again is Cecilia Immergreen and Gigi Murin kind of talking to each other. So in the green, we have recently, I've just been having so much anxiety because I can't find a single manga that I like. I like so many different genres, like romance, and romance, but I just don't know what to do. And then we have Gigi coming in with the, sorry, what did you say? I was looking at my phone, with then returning to Cece for the ugh. And then throughout this, we get sort of a yes and callback sort of thing with Gigi going, yeah, and pretending to listen, but she's actually looking at her phone. I think the three main takeaways from here is that one, there is mention of anxiety, and I think since it's a pretty silly upbeat song, they don't want to get too into the heavier side of emotional stuff, so it's played off as a joke of saying the anxiety is coming from not being able to find a manga that they like, and they like so many different genres, romance. However, I think it is worth mentioning that anxiety is coming up in the Cecilia version of things, as we'll see in the next passage. This is also a funny line, but I think it's also interesting that there is sort of a disconnect between thinking that you like so many different genres, but you actually only like one genre, which is romance, and also romance is sort of just sense of like love is on the mind, etc. And then the third thing to notice is just that there is sort of a discord between Gigi and Cecilia, where Cecilia is trying to open up about what's going on and her anxiety, even if it's from a silly source, and Gigi isn't listening, which then upsets Cecilia at the end here. And so we can kind of see that these two friends, first they meet, and in the first interlude, one is asking for a recommendation, or one is asking where the bathroom is, the other starts to give a recommendation for a tea shop, but then the other person shuts them down and says, well, I don't speak German. So there's sort of a disconnect in communication between the two. Then we jump to the next interlude where they're talking, and once again there is sort of a disruption of communication, and in this one Gigi is distracted by looking at her phone, but at the same time she does say, sorry, what did you say? I mean, that's sort of just what you say when you're not listening to someone, but she is hoping that Cece will repeat herself, but Cece is hurt that Gigi wasn't paying attention, and she's frustrated and doesn't want to have to re-explain it all. But that being said, let's jump into the next passage. So then we get our next verse, which goes, oh, come on, can a girl not hope to lose your heart in reverie? There's no way to divert this trope, so let our brand of madness run its course. So here what's interesting is I feel like we're getting sort of a reveal of there almost being three stages, I would say. So first you get the sort of interlude conversations. So this is, Gigi and Cece talking, and they don't think there's any sort of audience watching. It's just a candid conversation. It's being done, spokenly. Again, candid conversation within the context of the song. I'm not trying to pretend that they recorded themselves and weren't aware of it or anything like that. But so here there's just a conversation between the two of them. Then we get these verses, which is
this group of them sort of reflecting on their current situation. And then that's why the next passage, which is sort of the chorus refrain vibe, is where we get that CCGG vibe, where it feels like it's a different person or a different collective than responding to these two first parts, if that makes sense. So keep that in mind. So here, it feels like it's the same Cecilia and Gigi from that last passage where they were talking about manga. In which Cecilia is now saying, oh, come on, can a girl not hope to lose your heart in reverie? So lose your heart in reverie, lose your in a sort of contemplative, dreamlike, kind of reflective state. And again, we get this mention of hope again versus cope and being cursed to cope. So can a girl not hope to lose her heart in reverie? There's no way to divert this trope. And here, trope, this is all sort of like literary vibes, which sort of connects back to the manga section as being a piece of literature. So let our brand of madness run its course. And so here I feel like we're almost getting that part 3 here, which well, arguably also here I would say is where we're sort of getting the fusion between the Cecilia and Gigi and the CCGG Madness type vibe. But this is an interesting passage to really look at what they're trying to talk about. So, oh, come on, can a girl not hope to lose your heart in reverie? I think the use of your here is interesting because you would think it would be saying, can a girl not hope to lose her heart in reverie? Or the heart in reverie, but to say your heart in reverie. And what does it mean really to lose your heart in a reverie? To lose your, like, because reverie again is a sort of like reflective, tranquil, sort of brooding, inward, introspective, sort of dreamy state. But I'm not entirely sure what it means to lose your heart within reverie, because I almost feel like usually it's within reverie that you almost find your heart, unless they mean to sort of lose yourself. Because if you lose yourself in reverie, or you get lost in thought, it's sort of more that way, where by being in a state of reverie, they're able to sort of lose their heart, which their heart could be potentially like aches, sadness, and sort of, let's say, distractions. And if you lose yourself in a state of meditation, you sort of have an out-of-body experience, in which, so here you have the person in reverie, and then their out-of-body experience here. But also just to lose yourself in thought means to sort of quiet that like inward, inside voice, which is also sort of sometimes like an intrusive thoughts. You can, silence intrusive thoughts by being in reverie. So in that sense, maybe it's losing your heart in that way. So can a girl not hope to basically escape for example, anxiety mentioned in the previous passage? Can a girl not hope to lose her anxiety in a state of reverie? Is the state of reverie like by reading manga, you're able to sort of like lose yourself in the story and forget about yourself as you sort of are teleported into this other story? Or is this just unconnected to that sort of passage? What's also interesting is there's no way to divert this trope. What's the trope here? Is the trope sort of everything I've been talking about, of the sort of CCGG madness taking over, which again is sort of the cat in the hat type trope, / just sort of like manic pixie girl trope, where someone comes into your life and sort of drags you out of a status quo. It takes you on this huge adventure that's way more chaotic than you're used to, but it changes you for the better. I think that may be the trope that they're talking about here, because then they say, let our brand of madness run its course, which is sort of saying like, just let it happen and stop trying to resist, which goes back to the previous part where they're saying you need to sign away your inhibitions, where it's sort of this idea of just let it happen, let it run its course, stop trying to resist it. And then in terms of quickly mentioning, before I wrap this part up, the rhyme scheme, we have hope and trope, and then we have course and reverie. So we sort of have an A, B, A, C rhyme scheme. But with that being said, let's jump into the next part. And so here we have our next chorus, which has some of the same lines, but there's some differences, which I want to specifically point out since we already talked about the chorus previously. So, take our hand, let's fly away. This is repeated in both versions. But then you have break a leg, now challenge fate, versus make a way now, choose a date. Then we have quick before your time's up, quick before your time's up. Give in and be our playmate, give in and be our playmate. Hop, step, jump, and our dreams await. Now we have hop, step, jump, our dreams await. So no, those are the same. And then we have love yourself, don't be afraid. It's the same. Then we have sign, just one condition, give in, release all inhibition, versus live up your ambition, come on, let go of intuition. So, you got to ask yourself when you're going through and studying something like this, why are there changes? So, why was this line changed from break a leg, now challenge fate, to make a way now, choose a date? I feel like what's interesting is break a leg is something you say at the start of something, or sort of almost before. Right before someone goes on stage, you say break a leg. But now that we're further in the song, we get make a way now, choose a date. And what's also interesting is here it says break a leg, comma, now challenge fate, while here it's make a way now, comma, choose a date. And I think that's interesting how this now is on different ends or sides of the comma, which also reveals more about how the passage of time is occurring here, where one, it's saying make a way now that you're into it, and you're sort of like in the process, you're in the present, while here it was saying break a leg, and now go and challenge fate. Here it's make a way now that you're doing it, choose a date. Choose a date is also interesting because challenge fate is again sort of a more like starting point of trying to break out of the chains of fate, while choose a date is like a much more easy thing to do. Challenge fate versus choose a date. I mean, choosing a date, it's simple, it's easy, and it's like an action you can realistically do without much struggle, while challenging fate is much harder. So I think it's interesting that it's like now that you're in the thick of it, make a way and just choose a date, just get it done. It's much more about like breaking up the work and making it easier for yourself. And then here we have, originally it says sign, just one condition, give in, release all inhibition. So again, this is at the start of things. So it's basically sign this before you start doing, the adventure, before you go on this whole flying away and, all of that stuff. Before you do that, make sure you sign this condition. While here, now that you've already signed and you're getting further into it, it's saying, well, live up to your ambition. Come on, let go of intuition. And now it's basically saying, like, don't overthink it. Although it's interesting because intuition is usually not overthinking. Intuition is usually just kind of your natural inclination and your sort of feeling about stuff. But now it's saying, let go of this sort of sense of feeling, things out. If your intuition is telling you not to do something, let go of that and just go on and do it. So here it's really just sort of turn off your brain, which also goes back to this sort of choose a date, with it being a much simpler thing. It's sort of like, don't think about it too much, don't overthink it, just choose a date, don't worry about what your intuition's telling yourself, just live up to your ambition. Focus on ambition and not intuition, because also intuition may incorrectly say, oh, you can't do it, that's too hard, that's impossible, but your ambition is the one that's hopeful and is saying, oh no, you can do it, like chase your dreams, pursue your goals. And that goes into this whole concept of hope that we've been seeing earlier, where originally the concept of being cursed to cope is flipped on its head into being a sense of hope. And then we're hearing I think it's Cecilia's the one who says the line of like, oh, can't a girl, just hope to lose her heart in reverie. Losing your heart is also sort of again, could be a play on sort of losing yourself, and therefore letting go of intuition is similar, where you lose yourself in a story, you stop thinking about yourself and you just think about the story. Well, here you're losing yourself in your ambitions. You're not thinking about yourself, your fears, your doubts, etc. You're just thinking about your ambition, your goals, and your hope. So here we have another interlude, which goes, why do you always yell at me all the time? I just don't get it. The next is, 'cause you're so stupid. Every time I come to you and I'm trying to be really, really nice, all you do is talk over me. Well, maybe you should have something good to say for once. I have so many good things to say every single day. Literally not a single time. You drive me insane. You're so stupid, I can't stand you. So here, again, if we think of the sort of 3 stages of this sort of like candid convo, then sort of almost reflection, and then the CCGG Madness, this being the third, we're once again in another stage of this first one. So here, where we return back to them sort of just sitting there and talking to each other, these are supposed to be 2 chairs. So they're sitting here talking to each other. They end up getting into a fight. And so it says, why do you always yell at me all the time? I just don't get it. The other one says, because you're so stupid. Every time I come to you, I'm trying to be really, really nice. All you do is talk over me. Well, maybe you should have something good to say, which means they feel that the things they come to talk to aren't good, but I believe this is Gigi is the one saying that she's trying to be really nice. So she's trying to say good things. And she even doubles down and says, I have so many good things to say every single day. But then Cecilia says, literally not a single time. You drive me insane. And then it's, you're so stupid, I can't stand you. So again, this is sort of a spoken passage. So it kind of fits in again with this sort of structure we're looking at. Which again, I feel like the reflection stage is almost like a Greek chorus, which goes way back to like Aristotle and stuff, where you kind of have like a group come in and sing and explain the sort of like emotions of what's going on and sort of like summarize the plot. But yeah, once again though, the key thing that's going on with this whole fight, as we've seen in all the other ones, is that this is fundamentally a disruption in communication and sort of a failure to communicate, because clearly one side thinks they are saying good, nice things, and the other one saying, no, you don't ever have anything good to say, and that drives me insane, and well, no, you talk over me, and well, it's because you're stupid and I can't stand you, and all of this stuff. So they're just not communicating well. And so it sort of seems like, again, here they're not communicating well because they seem very like rigid and uptight, and there's, this starts off immediately intense where it's, why do you always yell at me? And then the CCGG Madness is all about sort of like releasing your inhibitions and releasing your intuition. So it's more of like just chill and have fun and sort of like let the madness of all this sort of help you almost find a sort of like nirvana and euphoria. It's sort of like through the madness and the descent into madness, one then finds euphoria and enlightenment and joy and happiness. And so these moments are pre the descent into madness, although as they fight, they seem to be descending into their own sort of madness. But there definitely seems to be sort of like a direction here going on of into madness, then you'll reach enlightenment. So let's see if this second reflection stage comes up and what they have to say. So here we have our bridge, which goes, all our fun must come to an end, but at least you found a friend. So let us play and stay forever now together. And again, I think that this sort of fun that's coming to an end it's coming to an end because of the fight we just saw in the interlude. So that's why I feel like, again, it's like set up where you can see, let's get green, so you can see, Cecilia and, Gigi are on stage, and this is where they're talking about, cafes and manga and, having a fight. And then there's like another, let's get another green, there's another CC and a Gigi over here who are serving as a Greek choir, and they're sort of or Greek chorus / Greek choir, and they're sort of looking over here and commenting on the conversation that's happening here. And I feel like these two can't hear these two, but this Greek chorus can hear them. So there's sort of a disbalance there. And then we get this sort of next version, which is over here, which is sort of connected to them, but I feel like it should be marked as being slightly different. And they are the sort of, CCGG Madness. And they're the ones who then talk to this group, not the Greek chorus version, and they're the ones saying to, let in to the fun and release your inhibitions and all that stuff about, take their hands and fly away and have fun. At the same time, I kind of feel like you could argue that these two are these two, but these two aren't self-aware as they're having these fights and stuff, and then these two are almost them after a moment of reflection, then talking to the audience, where it's like, hey, yeah, things get messy between us, but come fly away with us and we'll all have fun because we are Autofister and we are CCGG. And so I feel like there's sort of, again, it's sort of complicated relationship between all of these voices, because again, it's saying our fun must come to an end, and we just saw this group's fun come to an end, group one, because they got into a big fight, and they're probably not going to be hanging out anymore for today. But then it's our fun, so therefore I think this sort of CCGG are the ones who are like, it looks like our fun ended for today, but that's okay because at least you found a friend and they have each other. So anyway, let us play and stay forever now together. I also think it's interesting, just in terms of like interesting word choice and sort of subversions, is that we start with the fun is coming to an end, but then they're saying, no, let's play forever and stay forever together. So this directly sort of contradicts the concept of the fun coming to an end. And that's why I feel like, you know what I think it is? I think the third version here, the third group, is basically the first group after they've had their enlightenment of going insane. So you have these two, and they're having all these struggles to communicate, and they're always sort of not understanding each other or listening to each other. Then they go down the rabbit hole into sort of the madness of the CCGG Madness, and they do all of that, and then they come out as this sort of more enlightened state, and it's this enlightened state that's saying, well, hey, look at them having a fight, but we're enlightened, so we realize that you found a friend, and as a result, since we're enlightened, let's play and stay forever now together now that they've reached this sort of enlightenment by going on this sort of journey of insanity and madness, if that makes sense. So yeah, so then we have our third chorus, which is down here. So here's our first one, our second one, and now we have our third one over here. And here there's more differences than between the first and the second. They both have the first same opening line, which is take our hand, let's fly away. But then we have turn around and let us stay. And what's interesting again is, so break a leg is something you say before someone goes on stage. So it's a state of before. Then we have make a way now, which is sort of present. And then turn around and let us stay. If you've reached the end of your journey, you then turn around to look back at everywhere you've gone. So here we sort of have a sense of it's at the end. And also let us stay. Stay is a sort of more permanent, you're staying somewhere rather than moving. You're not going somewhere, which, previously we're trying to make a way, choose a date, all that. Now we're just staying. So here we're at the end. Sign just one condition, which is a connection to this second to last line in the first chorus. Come on, join in our sacred mission. The sacred mission here seems to be this sort of, madness equals friendship vibe. Then we have fly away, which again is a repeat from this original first part that's in all of them. And then we have the Hey Hey CCGG Mad Fun, which is a connection to those earlier passages, and the Gremlin Automaton. Then so take, our hand, and this is, again, a broken up repeat of this part that we've seen earlier about take our hand, let's fly away. So the implication is take our hand, and then they will all fly away. And again, here we have it at the end. So here, I think this part I wrote here about madness basically equaling friendship, I think that's sort of the thesis and the main theme of this whole song. Here we see two characters struggling to, connect and communicate, but there's still this sort of desire to communicate where, one of them will be very frustrated if the other wasn't listening, etc. And then we're being told to let go of inhibition and intuition and to instead, subscribe to ambition. And now we get this idea of the mission, and mission also notably rhymes with the inhibition and ambition and intuition. So it feels very important when you put all of these together. And again, this is the one condition now. So again, this sort of contract you have to make, and the contract you have to make to join the sacred mission is, I feel like it's sort of to let yourself fall into sort of a state of madness so that then you can come out above in this better state of friendship, but also a state of hope and just ambition, dreams, all of that stuff. Because if you let go of your inhibition and your intuition, and I think that's why the intuition originally threw me off, because it's not really overthinking. Your intuition is sort of the opposite of overthinking. It's sort of your gut reaction to something, your sort of sense of intuition. But if you let go of inhibition, which again, someone who usually releases all inhibition is someone who's like basically very drunk. They're not, they're not going about things in a very conscious way. Then you let go of your intuition, which is sort of your like base level of trying to think. You kind of are going to enter a state of madness just by doing those two things. And I think that's sort of the CCGG madness and the CCGG sort of mad fun. You're going to have a lot of fun by doing these two things. That's why, again, we sort of associate it with sort of partying and drinking, and sort of same with the intuition, and just, living up to your ambition and actually just doing the thing. And then you get this sort of, you're just in a sort of better state of friendship and, again, kind of pursuing your hopes and your dreams where you're no longer coping, you actually are hoping. And I think it takes a certain level of madness to hope, especially when it's against all odds. Being able to maintain a sense of hope, it requires a certain level of madness. And again, I think that's sort of the big theme of this. So that being said, that's going to wrap up today's episode of The Poetic Genius of, in which we talked about this great song. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm always excited when I see Hololive members release new songs, because then it means we get to do a little dissection like this. But yeah, if you have any other songs you'd like me to take a look at, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your recommendations. And if you enjoyed this and want to be notified when there's more content, please consider subscribing and giving the video a like. It helps a lot. But yeah, with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up. So take care, and I will see you in the next one.